The host of the popular show, The Astrology Podcast, Chris Brennan, he compiled all of that research, published a book called Hellenistic Astrology. I asked him how the research process actually worked, how long it took, and how it can all be applied to astrology today. Could you walk me through the work involved in first translating and then contextualizing these ancient texts?
Luckily, a lot of academics over the past century have spent a lot of time collecting manuscripts of these ancient astrological texts as part of studies in the history of science, and they compared them and then published what they thought the original versions of the texts were in their original languages. And so astrologers and other academics over the past few decades have been translating from those what are called critical editions of ancient astrological texts, and then trying to understand them by trying to learn the language and the technical terms used in them, and then starting to apply and test out the techniques.
Did the cohort of astrologers have to travel around to read them, or how did that work?
Yeah, for the most part, there's a surprising number of ancient astrological texts that are actually available in many college campus libraries as part of their sort of history of science wings, or sometimes within the context of the study of classics, like some historians of the Roman Empire, for example. They want to be able to read these astrological texts so they understand that when a historical author refers to something astrological, they understand what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. But in other instances, there's also manuscripts that are still in libraries around the world, or sometimes in private collections, and occasionally astrologers will get access to these or get a photocopy, and they'll translate from that.
What are the main things that you think people should know about the ancients and how it might apply today?
In terms of the basics of life back then versus life today, many of the basics are still very much the same. And so that's why a system from 2,000 years ago can still be relevant today, because our fundamental focus in life in terms of, family, relationships, career, friends, travel, things like that, all of those areas of life are still fundamentally the same.
If you could explain to me that relationship of fate, predetermination, and how we might understand that today in relation to astrology. It might be a little bit different than many people realized or expected.
The alignment of the planets at the moment that you're born has something to say about your future and about the quality of your life and the things that will happen during the course of it. So that implies at some basic level that things are, or some portions of our life to some extent, are predetermined or fated to occur, or however you want to phrase that. Different astrologers phrase it in different ways, but that's essentially the basic premise of astrology, and it's hard to get around that to some extent. So astrologers have historically had some debates about the extent to which things are predetermined, and that's a long-standing sort of argument.
Knowing what we know now about astrology 2,000 years ago and in 2018, how do we merge those two, and where do we go from here?
The purpose of studying these texts is not to go back into the past and stay there, but instead our goal is to go back into the past, find the best pieces of ancient astrology that we had lost over the transmission over the past 2,000 years, bring them forward into the future, and then synthesize them with the best parts of modern astrology.
You just heard, I didn't know this before, that astrology has scientific roots somewhat and was a serious endeavor, but its implementation has, shall we say, evolved over the years.